Near the top of the Eiffel Tower, there's a secret room. Not for sightseeing, not for photos. A room built to welcome people most of the world would never be allowed to meet. And then, in the summer of 1940, when the world shook under the shadow of a man who made entire cities bow, right here, at this tower, that man had to give up. Not because of an army, not because of artillery, but because of something colder than fear, more than 1,600 steps. You heard that right. A monument people think was built for romance once became a test so brutal, even the man who shook the world couldn't take the easy way up. And the two men tied to those two moments, we'll come back to them near the end of this video. But before we reach that secret room, before we climb those 1,600 steps, there's a bigger question. How did the Eiffel Tower, hated, mocked, and built with an expiration date, survive and become a symbol of the world? Let's begin. Before the tower could even rise into the sky, Paris put it on trial. Not with hammers, with words. As early as February 1887, while it was still being built, the Eiffel Tower faced fierce backlash from artists and intellectuals of the time. To them, it was a brutal slab of metal, an ugly scar on Paris's skyline. But down on the site, every brace, every joint, every connection became engineering's quiet reply. We're not building this to be pretty, we're building it to stand. And that conflict, art versus engineering, made the Eiffel Tower feel dangerous in a very specific way. If it collapsed, it would collapse in front of the entire world. If it stood, it would stand in the face of laughter and hate. So the real question becomes, who dared to imagine this in the first place? Here's what most people don't realize. The tower that carries Eiffel's name didn't begin with Eiffel. In June 1884, two engineers at Eiffel's company, Maurice Coechlin and Émile Nouguier, chased a wild idea, a metal tower rising 984 feet into the air, a centerpiece for the 1889 World's Fair. On June 6th, Coechlin drew the first concept, 4 curved legs meeting at the top, originally with 5 platforms. Eiffel saw it, and he wasn't thrilled, but he allowed them to keep developing it. Then the design was transformed by chief architect Stephen Sauvestre. Stronger feet, a more convincing arch, the number of platforms reduced from 5 to 2, and a sharper summit so it could satisfy engineering and defend the city a little less. On the 18th of September 1884, the rights to build a metal tower beyond 984 feet were registered under Eiffel, Coechlin, and Nouguier. And soon, Eiffel bought those rights and took full control. From that moment on, the world started calling it by one name, Eiffel. Now here's why this project feels less like a building and more like a machine. The Eiffel Tower was essentially born inside Eiffel's factory in Levallois-Perret. On site, the workforce never exceeded 250 because the hardest work was done in the workshop. To turn drawings into reality, 50 engineers worked for 2 years to produce 5,300 overall and detailed plans. They manufactured 2,500,000 rivets, but only 1,050,846 were actually set on site, about 42%. Most components were pre-assembled at ground level into sections about 16.4 feet long, temporarily bolted, then taken to the site, where bolts were replaced by red-hot rivets. So the job didn't look like construction. It looked like a giant assembly line, where everything had to be done in the right order, with the right geometry. Paris sees a tower reaching into the sky, but the real battle started where nobody takes photos, underground. The 4 legs form a massive square, about 410 feet on each side. They poured concrete foundations to reduce pressure on the soil down to about 64 pounds per square inches at the base. But the terrifying side was near the Seine. To fight water, they used pneumatic caissons, sealed working chambers that pushed water out. You don't need to watch water flood in to understand the risk. If the foundation was wrong, everything above it would be wrong. On the 1st of July, 1887, the precise metal assembly officially began under Jean Compagnon. Up to about 98 feet, pieces were lifted using cranes positioned along the future elevator route. From 98 feet to 148 feet, they erected 12 wooden scaffolds. Above 148 feet, the scaffolding anchored itself to the beams of the second level. And then came the moment that could kill the entire project, bringing the horizontal members into alignment with all four legs, the closing of the geometry. If one leg was off by just a few inches, that error would explode higher up. You couldn't fix it later. You'd have to dismantle it, meaning you lose. But they pulled it off. On the 7th of December, 1887, the work at the second level was completed around 187 feet high. After that, they climbed toward the third level at about 377 feet. And as the pace accelerated, in September 1888, workers went on strike. Because this tower isn't just metal, it's discipline, people, and the price of risk. Construction began on the 28th of January, 1887, and wrapped up in March 1889, just in time for the World's Fair. The tower opened on the 31st of March 1889. In that first week before the elevators were running, thousands of people climbed up by stairs. And here's the strangest irony. The thing once mocked as a monster made people climb inside it just to stand within it. Now, let's circle back to the two details I dropped at the start of this video. First, the secret room near the top. And the moment the Eiffel Tower was finished, it had a secret, a place not meant for the crowd. Near the summit, Gustave Eiffel kept a private office, not to enjoy a luxury view, but to run experiments and host elite guests. Inside that room, history recreates a famous moment. Eiffel welcoming Thomas Edison, a meeting between the man who built the tower and the man who lit up the modern age. And during that visit, Edison even gifted Eiffel a phonograph. But the most unforgettable detail comes from war. In the summer of 1940, as German forces entered Paris, French engineers made a cold act of defiance. They cut the elevator cables, meaning if Hitler wanted to reach the top and stand over Paris's, literally, he'd have to walk. And this isn't a cute staircase. From the ground to the top, it's 1,665 steps more than 1,600. Do you feel what that means? A tower once mocked as a freak became Paris's quiet message. You want our summit? Then earn it. But the Eiffel Tower still carried a suspended sentence. Eiffel had the right to profit from it for 20 years, starting the 1st of January 1890. After that, the city could decide its fate. So why wasn't it torn down? Because by the time those 20 years passed, the tower had already transformed from a hated, controversial symbol into a machine with real value that Paris didn't want and couldn't afford to throw away. In an era when the world began racing on signals, a structure rising over 1,000 feet in the heart of Paris became a perfect platform for science, and especially for radio transmission. And once something becomes infrastructure, nobody asks, is it beautiful? They ask, if we remove it, what do we lose? And the answer was obvious. The Eiffel Tower survived not because it was romantic, but because it became useful, the one thing strong enough to save it from demolition, and powerful enough to turn it into a symbol for the entire world.